I gave 18 years to Briarstone Packaging, built its most profitable accounts with my own hands, and kept the company steady through every ugly quarter. Then the board replaced me with the CEO's son-in-law like I was an old chair they didn't want in the room anymore. It happened in a glass conference room with a view of the city I thought I'd earned my place in. The board chair slid a neat one-page announcement across the table and said, "We're excited to bring in fresh leadership." Then the CEO, Hollis Pryce, didn't even look guilty. He just nodded toward the man sitting beside him, Dane Larkhill, his son-in-law, like he was presenting a gift. Dane smiled like this wasn't happening to a person. He said, "I'm honored to step in." And the board asked me to support a smooth transition, as if the last 18 years were simply a phase they were done with. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Corbin Ansell, and that meeting was the moment I learned loyalty means nothing when someone wants to keep power in the family. When I started at Briarstone, we were a regional supplier with 2 aging plants and a reputation for being good enough. I wasn't born into business. I was the guy who showed up early, stayed late, and learned every department because I hated not understanding the full machine. I helped modernize the line, pushed through vendor changes, and convinced major clients to give us a chance when they had bigger names courting them. People like Maura Kittredge in operations and Silas Redmond in finance knew I wasn't flashy, but they trusted me because I didn't gamble with other people's jobs. My wife Ione watched me carry stress home like a second coat. She'd reheat dinner and pretend she wasn't disappointed when I came in after dark. Our son Beck learned to keep his voice down when I was on calls, because Dad's working was the rule of our house. And every time I told myself it was worth it, it was because I believed the company saw me as more than labor. I believed results mattered. What I didn't see was how often my work was being filed under company success, while my name stayed conveniently replaceable. Dane didn't come in at the bottom. He arrived with a title, a renovated office, and a confidence that didn't match his experience. Hollis called him a strategic thinker and started inviting him to meetings that used to be mine, client renewals, plant efficiency reviews, even hiring discussions. Dane would ask basic questions like he was learning, but it wasn't learning. It was harvesting. He wanted my account history, my negotiation notes, my vendor pressure points, my calendar patterns, everything I'd built through relationships and long memory. The board began using a new phrase, succession planning. That phrase showed up right after Hollis's daughter married Dane. Suddenly there were leadership gaps that only Dane could fill, even though I'd been filling them for years. The disrespect was subtle at first, my recommendations noted, then ignored, my meetings reassigned for efficiency. The worst day before the firing was when Dane took credit in front of the board for a cost savings plan I'd written, then looked at me afterward and said, "We're a team, Corbin." Like the theft was friendly. I didn't confront him because I could already see the trap. If I protested, I would be called territorial. If I stayed quiet, they would call it consent. So I did what I always did. I kept working, thinking work would protect me. It didn't. They offered me a severance package that sounded polite and felt insulting, and they wanted me out fast, badge turned in, laptop wiped, goodbye email drafted by HR. As I walked through the building, I caught people pretending not to see me, because fear makes coworkers into strangers. Maura hugged me quickly near the loading bay and whispered, "This isn't right." Silas wouldn't meet my eyes. I could tell he'd been warned. I drove home with a cardboard box in the passenger seat and my hands steady on the wheel, even though something inside me felt like it had been replaced with air. Ione opened the door before I could knock. She looked at the box, then at my face, and her expression changed the way a room changes when the power goes out. I told her. They replaced me with Dane. She didn't ask why. She just said, "I'm sorry," like she was apologizing for the world. That night I stared at the ceiling, replaying the board chair's words, fresh leadership, smooth transition, until they stopped sounding like English and started sounding like betrayal. Then, the next afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. A calm voice said, "Mr. Ansell? My name is Tolland Greer. I'm calling because I believe you were just removed for a reason that has nothing to do with performance, and I think you deserve to know what I saw." I didn't speak for a second. My throat tightened. All I managed was, "I'm listening." And on the other end of the line, I heard the first piece of truth that didn't sound like opinion. It sounded like evidence. Tolland Greer didn't sound excited to be right. He sounded tired, like someone who'd watched something wrong happen and finally decided he couldn't sit with it anymore. He told me he was an outside compliance consultant the board had brought in months earlier to review procurement controls. And he said my name kept coming up in meetings I wasn't invited to. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I was in the way. He explained it slowly, choosing his words like he understood this call could change my life. Hollis Pryce, the CEO, had pushed an expansion plan that looked impressive on paper, but depended on swapping long-term vendors for a new set of preferred partners that just happened to have connections to Dane Larkhill's side of the family. Tolland said he'd flagged the conflict and was told it was being handled internally. Then he told me the part that made my stomach drop. The board didn't remove me because they believed Dane was better. They removed me because I wouldn't sign off on shortcuts. I was known for asking for documentation, pushing back on vague pricing, and refusing handshake deals. You weren't replaceable as a worker, he said. You were replaceable as an obstacle. I sat at my kitchen table while Ione watched my face change, and I didn't know what to do with the feeling that came over me. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't even anger. It was the shock of finally understanding that my loyalty hadn't been misunderstood. It had been calculated. Tolland said he couldn't send me confidential reports, but he could tell me what was already on the edge of becoming formal. Supplier irregularities, a rushed contract approval, and board members being reassured that Corbin will sign whatever's needed during transition. When he said that, I realized they hadn't just fired me. They expected to keep using my name like a stamp. Within a week, the phone call started. Not from Hollis at first, but from the people who had to live inside the mess. Maura Kittredge called me late one night, voice low, asking if I had a clean copy of the plan efficiency plan and the risk notes tied to our biggest client renewal. I asked her, carefully, why she was calling me and not Dane. She went quiet for a moment, then said, "Because Dane doesn't have it. He keeps saying you must have kept the critical pieces." That line hit me like an insult wrapped in fear. They were already building the story that I'd sabotaged them by taking my knowledge with me, even though they were the ones who pushed me out and demanded a fast wipe of my laptop. The next day, Silas Redmond emailed me from his personal account. One sentence, no greeting. "Can we talk off the record?" When we spoke, he sounded like a man balancing on a railing. He told me Dane was pushing new vendor terms that looked cheaper up front, but had penalties buried deep, and finance was being pressured to move fast before the next board update. Then, exactly as I expected, Hollis finally called. His tone was soft, almost fatherly, like we were still on the same team. He said, "Corbin, I hate how this ended, but we need your help to steady the ship for a few weeks." I waited. I let him sit in his own words. Then he added, like it was a small favor, "Just send Dane the client history notes so he can step in smoothly." He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't apologize for the humiliation. He only asked for access. Access to relationships I'd spent 18 years earning. I told him I'd consider a consulting agreement through HR with clear scope and rate. Hollis's voice tightened. "This isn't the time to nickel and dime," he said. And that was when I understood something painfully simple. They didn't see me as a person negotiating. They saw me as property trying to charge rent. I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't rant. I didn't run around trying to expose them. I did the cleanest thing I could do. I documented everything. Every call. Every email. Every request that proved they had removed me publicly but still needed me privately. Ione sat with me while I organized dates and names, and I could see the hurt on her face. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she'd watched me give my best years away and still be treated like a tool. I met with an employment attorney and asked one question. How do I protect my name from being used as the excuse when their plan fails? The attorney told me to keep communication formal and to stop doing unpaid labor immediately. So I did. When Maura called again, I told her I cared about the team, but I wouldn't provide operational guidance without a contract, and I wouldn't put anything in writing that could be edited into Corbin approved this. When Silas asked if I'd sit in on a meeting, just to help, I told him I couldn't. Not because I wanted them to burn, but because I could feel the trap closing. If I helped, I would be tied to decisions I didn't make. Meanwhile, Tolland called again. He didn't sound pleased. He sounded grim. He told me the board had started asking why several documents had conflicting approval trails, and why Dane's preferred vendor list overlapped with personal connections that hadn't been disclosed properly. "They're not asking because they miss you," he said. They're asking because they can't explain the paper trail. And that's where the real revenge lived, quietly inside procedure and accountability. I had spent 18 years building systems that required signatures, logs, checks, and clear ownership. Hollis and Dane had always treated those systems like red tape. Now those same systems were becoming the mirror they couldn't look away from. And I didn't have to shout for the mirror to work. 2 months after I was replaced, I got a call from a number I recognized, the board chair, Etta Winslow. Her voice was measured, but there was strain under it, like someone trying to keep dignity while admitting a mistake. She said the board was reviewing leadership decisions and asked if I would meet to clarify some operational history. I didn't feel victory. I felt tired. The kind of tired you get when people finally want the truth, but only because they can't avoid it anymore. I agreed to meet, but I brought my attorney. Not to attack them, just to make sure my words couldn't be twisted into permission. In that meeting, I didn't accuse anyone. I simply answered questions with facts. Who negotiated which accounts? Why certain vendors were chosen? What controls were in place and why they mattered? I explained calmly that I could not and would not vouch for decisions made after my removal. The room stayed quiet as I spoke, because facts have a weight that opinions don't. Etta thanked me with a tight smile and said, "We may have underestimated the role you played." I didn't correct her. I didn't say I told you so. I just nodded. A week later, Hollis called again, but this time his voice was smaller. He said, "Corbin, the board is asking questions. Dane is under pressure. We need to show unity." I listened, then said, "You replace me publicly. You can't ask me to protect you privately." There was a pause on the line long enough to feel like a confession. I didn't hear what happened inside Briarstone after that in perfect detail, because I didn't chase it. But I heard enough from Maura and Silas to understand the ending. The board's fresh leadership experiment turned into a liability review, Dane's authority began shrinking under scrutiny, and people stopped treating my removal like a normal transition. Not because I punished them, because their own paperwork wouldn't let them pretend anymore. In the end, the most emotional moment wasn't when they stumbled. It was the night Nolan, my son, sat at our kitchen table and said, "Dad, you gave them everything." And I looked at Ione, then back at him, and said softly, "I know. That's why I'm not giving them the rest of me."